Thank you for that. And thank you to Her Excellency Deputy Secretary General for what I'm sure we can agree is a fantastic opening address to set the stage of this next conversation. Look, as we kick off the month of September around the world, this month is filled with summits, from the Africa Climate Summit, just kicking off in Nairobi, to the G20, taking place over the coming days in India, to the East Asia Summit, the ASEAN Summit, and of course, at the end of the month, the UN General Assembly in New York. And what better way to kick off this month of global summitry than with the Global Town Hall this weekend, which we're thrilled that thousands of you are joining today. And the reason for that is that this summit, of all the ones I just mentioned, it's the only one actually dedicated to the voices of civil society from north, south, east, west. And this next session in particular dives into how all of us can make a difference in a troubled world. As the Deputy Secretary General alluded to, civil society is key to delivery and shaping our future. All of the challenges we've mentioned here, from climate change to the Sustainable Development Goals to sustainable jobs, all of this is actually only possible with a thriving and active civil society. We know from history that accountability is key to delivery. And yet, right around the world, we see civic space under threat. We see barriers ranging from coercive measures all the way through to lack of funding being a barrier of entry. And so now is an opportunity over the next hour or so to unpack these challenges, but also look at the opportunities, the hopeful nature, because day in, day out, people around the world are organizing. They are pushing back, and they are here having their voices heard. We can, as the Deputy Secretary General said, learn from one another and be a powerful force for change. And so, to kick us off, it's really my great privilege and honor to give the floor back to Nobel Peace Prize laureate Maria Ressa. Maria, you have the screen.
Hello, everybody. I'm Maria Ressa. I'm actually in Venice talking to a group of politicians, journalists, civil society groups about what's roiling our world today, technology. It's very similar to what you'll be discussing. I'm so sorry I can't be there in person, but I'm looking forward to see what you do. Let me just lay out what we've seen in the Philippines, in Rappler, and in other parts of the world, that the technology that connects us has changed everything. And a lot of this began as early as 2014. I started calling it death by 1,000 cuts. I mean, it is of democracy, but also of the world as we knew it. By the time we stepped out of the COVID lockdowns, we stepped onto the rubble of the world that was deceptively familiar. We still moved with the same types of framework and structures, and yet everything has changed. It's a fundamental reason why, if you think about it, right? When journalists, news organizations stopped being the gatekeepers to the public sphere and technology took over, there was a lack of standards and ethics, nothing to protect the public sphere. This is still being debated today, and the forward-looking that you've seen is the European Union's Digital Services Act, which really just rolled out last Friday, 2 Fridays ago. So think about it like this, right? In 2018, MIT did a study that showed that lies on social media spread 6 times faster than really boring facts, right? That one fundamental choice, lies spread faster, and what we've seen in our data in the Philippines is lies laced with anger and hate spread even faster. E.O. Wilson, who's a biologist, said that, the greatest crisis we face is our Paleolithic emotions, our medieval institutions, and our godlike technology. Technology hacked our biology to keep us scrolling, right? That's the end goal. It became an attention economy and a new business model, a business model that didn't even really have a name until 2019. Surveillance capitalism was born. So now we're handling this. where everything is distilled to data. The first time that we dealt with AI, artificial intelligence, was really machine learning, putting all of your posts together and creating a model of you that knows you better than you know yourself. I mean, think about it, especially if you're on Facebook and you're on the marketplace, you're also in the dating app. Well, all of that is data. And what happens is all you have to do is to take all of the models of all of us, and AI came in and gathered all of that. That became the motherlode database that's used for micro-targeting. Right? What's micro-targeting? Micro-targeting is sending you the right message, someone paid for that message, that will nudge you at your weakest moment to that message, right? So now replace the word model with clone. Did you agree to be cloned? Should these technology platforms, they say because they used machine learning to build that model, that it's theirs. They own our clones. That's the fundamental issue at stake, right? And then when you have a surveillance capitalism business model, the goal is to keep us scrolling. And part of that is that the weaknesses, the vulnerabilities of the technology platforms were exploited by geopolitical power, actually exploited by politics. Because what was once used for marketing and advertising, these platforms are now used to shift your message, right? Okay, so think about it. If facts spread faster than lies, the other way, if lies spread faster than facts, let me say the three sentences I say over and over again. Without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without these three, we have no shared reality. We can't solve any problem, let alone existential ones like climate change. And here's the kicker. We cannot have democracy. Another interesting thing we've seen around the world, how can you have integrity of elections if you don't have integrity of facts? This is part of the reason we've seen this trend, illiberal leaders being elected democratically, and once they take power, they crush the institutions of democracy from within. And they don't stay in their own countries. They ally with others around the world, pushing globally a tipping point against democracy. Dem out of Sweden said that last year, 60% of the world is now under authoritarian rule. This year, that number changed to 72%. So here's the problem for civil society. How do you tackle this? It's a completely new information ecosystem, a corrupted information ecosystem where journalists are under attack. What will you do differently? Good luck with the answers to the questions. Some quick answers to that. Check out the 4-layer pyramid that we tried to put together in the Philippines in the May 2022 elections, Facts First PH, a protection of facts, where we bought almost 150 different groups together to try to protect the facts. I wish you luck in the discussions you have. I'm Maria Ressa. Thank you for having me.
Well, some provocative questions from Maria Ressa, everything from the attention economy, the constraints of misinformation, all the way through to how we get distracted and the role of facts to create, as she said, truth, because without truth, you can't have trust. So with that, it gives me great honor to introduce to all of you our esteemed panelists today. I'm going to kick off with some high-level questions and give each of our panelists a couple of minutes to respond. Please, please, please post questions in the chat. The second half of this interactive panel will have an opportunity to have your questions respond. Maria has given us a challenge, and that is how do we go forth in this troubled world? And we want to hear your solutions, your ideas, your questions. So with that, the opening questions I'm going to begin with for our panelists is firstly, we know freedom of information, association, and other fundamental rights are under test right now. These principles, which were all enshrined over 75 years ago in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, are now, as Maria said, under breaking point right now. You look around the world, you can see the many pushbacks going on. So my question to each of the panelists is, can you share how these developments manifest in your own country? How do you address them, and how do you get around these challenges? What kind of governmental leadership do you need? And feel free to reflect on your experiences where you've come face to face with these constraints and resistance yourself to overcome these challenges. So with that, I'm going to go to our first speaker, Anna Lotta Walsh, who is the Director of Research at the Center for Asian Philanthropy and Society. Anna Lotta, you have the floor.
Thank you, and good morning. It's an absolute pleasure to be speaking here today among such an esteemed group of speakers. Now, rather than answering this question from my own country, I'm currently based in Hong Kong, originally from the Netherlands. I want to address this from a Pan-Asian perspective, because at the Center of Asian Philanthropy, we conduct a research called the Doing Good Index. And this is a biannual report that looks at the ways in which private capital flows in Asia and the factors that enable and hinder that. And we look at 17 countries in economies in Asia, and we survey over 2,200 social sector organizations, and we speak to more than 100 experts. And we look at 4 different kind of indicators. We look at regulations, tax and fiscal policy, government, procurement, as well as ecosystem. And in mapping this landscape, we can really identify the levers that can be pulled to facilitate the flows of funding going towards the social sector. And also identify things that can be done. So things like strengthening accountability and transparency measures through regulations, building corporate support, facilitating cross-sector collaborations, and helping overcome a trust deficit that we see happen in Asia. And one of our findings from our 2022 report is that governments in the region are sending very mixed messages. On one hand, they are enacting policies that are helping the sector. They are facilitating registration and improving in transparency and accountability and moving things online. But at the same time, they are also signaling an increased wariness and distrust of the sector. And one of the areas where we really see this is when it comes to foreign funding. Foreign funding is traditionally a very important source of funding, but in 8 out of the 17 countries that we look at, there are restrictions in place on the ability to receive foreign funding. Now, to some extent, there's different reasons for that, including the decrease of foreign aid. But we also know that some governments are seeing foreign funding as a form of foreign influence. And this is really restricting the ability for organizations to operate. And I'd love to talk more about it later. And if you want to look at some of our data and countries and how they compare, please do look at our microsite for the Doing Good Index, where you can look more at that data.
Thank you so much for those remarks, Anna Lotta. And I couldn't agree more. Funding is so important. So I encourage everyone to check out that report you mentioned, check out that resource. We've seen it around the world. If civil societies aren't funded, if foundations aren't able to get those funding to those groups, it's very hard for those civil societies to properly thrive. So thank you for making that point, and hopefully we'll return to that in due course. Professor Denny Indrayana, who was the Vice Minister of Law and Human Rights of the Republic of Indonesia, and is now the Professor of Constitutional Law in the Faculty of Law at the University of Gadjah Mada. Professor Denny, you have the floor. I think you're on mute, Professor.
Sure. Sorry.
Oh, good. Thank you.
I mute myself. Okay, thank you, Mike. Good afternoon from Melbourne, actually. I am in Melbourne instead of in Indonesia, in Australia now. So, Indonesian experience. In my opinion, the biggest challenge now that we face, we have this Suharto authoritarian regime from 66 up to until 98, and we fought against that. The demand at that time was anti-corruption, amend the constitution, and send the military back to the back. Then we enjoyed the reform era for about 20 years. But in my opinion, the last 10 years, the corrupt regime restored. So the authoritarian regime unfortunately managed to rebirth by, unfortunately through the democratic, what we call the elections. So the election in Indonesia, unfortunately, is not the solution because it's not free and it's not fair. So civil society currently facing one of the biggest challenges. In terms of anti-corruptions, unfortunately, we do have anti-corruption commission, and 10 years ago, it was one of the strongest state institution who managed to eradicate corruption in Indonesia. But this 5 years, especially from 2019, the government actually managed to amend the law of the Anti-Corruption Commission and make it weakened. And therefore, the corruption now is one of the biggest challenges. As I mentioned, the judicial corruptions in Indonesia now is very rampant. And I lead one of the NGO, Indonesian Court Monitoring, based in Yogyakarta, Central Park, Java of Indonesia, and we fought against judicial corruption. When I worked with the Indonesian President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, I was his special advisor for legal issues, human rights, and anti-corruption. We installed a task force for fighting judicial mafia, but the task force only lived for about 2 years, and of course, within those very short time, we could not eradicate the judicial corruptions, which is very rooted in the system, unfortunately. And I myself facing a case against me because in 2015 we advocate the election, the chief police election. At that time, during his early months, President Jokowi nominated one candidate to be chief police. We and the NGOs and anti-corruption activists against the nomination because, in our opinion, the candidate was corrupt. There was a cover report by Tempo, one of the most well-known magazine in Indonesia, outlining his wealth, and we believe it was from corrupt activities. So we fought against this nomination. And because of that, some of the commissioners of the Anti-Corruption Commission was named as a suspect, and myself as well. That was in 2015. So it's more than 8 years now. I'm still a suspect. And
Professor Denny, we will come back to that story. I'm just keen to give the panelists all an opportunity to have their opening remarks. So maybe you can just put a fine point in the next 20 seconds, just in that last point.
the solution. That's the biggest challenge. It's very difficult to find solution because in my constitutional law, because I'm constitutional law scholar, it should be the election is the way out of this kind of corrupt system. But unfortunately, it's not the answer in Indonesia. So yeah, we actually I want to hear the other countries' experience. How can we manage to fight this kind of problem? Thank you.
Thank you. It's an important point on corruption we will come back to. I see lots of great questions in the chat. Please keep posting, keep the energy up. We will come back to those questions in a moment. But for now, I really want to give the floor to Nimala Devi Windagetta, who is the Secretary General of Global Barish Malaysia. Nimala, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for the opportunity today to share and learn together. First of all, Global Bersih is a 100% non-partisan, non-political, and totally volunteer-run organization, and we focus on the rights of overseas Malaysians, the diaspora. So basically, the limitations and restrictions that we face might differ from an organization that's based physically in Malaysia. But having said that, the rules and regulations and the laws in the country has a huge impact to the work we do or the advocacy work we do. Coming back to the keynote speaker before, we have realized in our work in the last years that there's a need for the laws and rules and regulations to evolve with the civil society organizations, also with the changes and the reform that has happened. And sometimes these laws that exist, they become a stumbling block. They are not put there extra to control, but they become a stumbling block because they don't evolve with the changes that have happened. I'll give you a simple example from Global Bersih's experience. We've been advocating for the voting rights of overseas Malaysians for years. Before 2013, we couldn't vote from overseas. We had to go back to vote. After 2013, we voted at the embassies. 2018, we could vote through postal voting. It sounds good on paper, but from 2018, every single elections that we had, state elections, general elections, we never had the possibility to send the ballots back on time. And if you ask me why, because the rules and regulations that we have in Malaysia states that 12 days is a workable time period for a postal voting. That worked during that time when only a certain gazetted group of Malaysians were allowed to vote per post. But as the reform has been pushed by civil society and changes have happened, and the paradigm of postal voting has changed, but the rules and regulations haven't changed, it doesn't cover. So we believe that there's a need for the rules and regulations that exist to evolve with the changes that happens through the civil society reform work. And that would support the civil society to become more active and more engaged. And how do you do this? That Global Bersih managed to try to push for reforms through policy, connecting with the policymakers. Because in the end, these are the people who are going to change the rules and regulations. So we engaged with our overseas voters, got information from them, had recommendations, key points, changes that we need to done, and feasible and flexibility is also very important when we make recommendations, because when we go there and say it has to be this way, then it becomes, oh, we cannot do that. But when we have flexibility with our work, and through that we have made many changes, we have many reforms that has worked for Malaysia. So I believe in Malaysia there is a chance for reform, there is the future, I'm very positive about it, but we need better leadership, we need leadership that's going to listen to us, we need education that talks about the civil society, the role that we play, and we as civil society, we need to refocus what we are doing on what we want and focus and push for that. And that's how Global Bersih has managed to get the reforms we want, and we are pushing for more. Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward for the discussions that's coming up. Thank you.
Well, that's a very hopeful message. And it sounds like you've got a lot of success stories to share with people around the world. So thank you for sharing that. Next up, we go to Noshia Dadravala, who is the CEO at the Center for the Advancement of Philanthropy in India. Noshia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I am from Mumbai in India. And I would like to open my remarks with saying that roughly 75 years ago, India attained independence from colonial rule thanks to civil society organizations. Movements such as civil disobedience by the leaders of that time, who are today worshipped as people who enabled India's independence. Today we see a different kind of regime where civil society organizations are seen as anti-national. The fact remains that it was civil society organizations that were the reason why India attained independence. And this would be true for many other Asian countries as well. But yet, our own people, our own democratically elected government sees civil society organizations as anti-national, as disruptive, and an impediment to development. So if there are civil society groups that raise questions on environment, it is seen as foreign funding coming into India to stop developmental work. If there is foreign funding that is coming into India for civil society to speak up, there are laws. There is a very draconian law we have in India, which is referred to as the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, FCRA, which is, by its name, it says Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. It's an act to regulate flow of funds into India. But what we find really happening is I think the law should be renamed as Foreign Contribution Control Act. It's about government controlling foreign contributions coming into India. As of the moment, even as I speak, there are close to 100 organizations, funding organizations, which are on the Government of India's watch list. That means even if you as an organization have a license under FCRA, which is Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, to receive money from those 100 watch list organizations, you need the prior permission of the Ministry of Home Affairs to receive that money. So what I see is there was a time when civil society organizations were noted for its vibrancy, innovation, and research-based advocacy. It was a partner in nation building. Today, government sees it not as a partner in nation building, but it sees it as opposed to nation building. And that narrative is false. It is untrue. It's what some of our speakers talked about earlier. A very recent study last year by CSOs at 75, that is 75 years after independence, shows that the non-profit sector in India actually contributes 2% of the GDP. So it is not a drain on the government of India, contributing 2% of the GDP. Government keeps talking about revenue forgone because, the non-profit sector is tax exempt and provides tax deductions to donor. It doesn't take into account that civil society organizations contribute to livelihoods, the skill building, and supplements gaps in the government's delivery system for welfare and development. So when I entered the sector some 40 odd years ago, I noticed that there was a love-hate relationship. What I see now is only a hate-hate relationship. And that is something that very much saddens me. The role of the government is to regulate organizations. What seems to be happening is now, increasingly, government is getting into control. There are laws, international laws like PMLA, the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, FATF, which are used for, it is essentially the essence of the law is to look at terror funding, etc. Unfortunately, these very laws are being used by the government on civil society organizations to terrorize civil society organizations, especially using the tools of Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, the Income Tax Act, and create a...
Nashir,
Yes.
Nashir, I want to come back to that in a second because I can see in the chat many people are resonating with you, and particularly your points on financing. But I want to come back to that point and let you finish. I just want to briefly, before we get into it, allow our final two panelists to have their opening remarks. And so I want to go quickly to Dr. Mahmood Al Hassan Khan, who is the Executive Director of the Center for South Asia and International Studies, joining us from Islamabad, Pakistan. Dr. Mahmood, you have the floor.
Yeah,
Thank you very much inviting me to express my expertise, my personal experience, and my diversified enterprising skills to address all of you. I really appreciate that the former speaker from India highly spoke about the one of the key essence of our collective effort to achieve independence in 1947 because of the massive socialization of the good cause, and the good cause was to eradicate the colonial rule in subcontinent, and both countries were independent afterwards. Yes, I really appreciate the good effort, and I specifically mentioned the SDGs, the unpacking, the good strategies which the former speakers talk about. And I specifically chalk out the holistic, comprehensive policy to address all these kind of regional and global perceptions and national narratives. So I just suggest that democracy, rather people's democracy, dialogue, diplomacy, development, digitalization, and delivery of good things, basically pertaining to basic necessities of life and basic human rights are the way forward. So in my country, unfortunately, we do have a lot of complex and complicated national narratives and the theories of self-gratification and glorifications pushing us towards the cognitive dissonance. That's why the role of civil society have already been marginalized, and the civil society role has become to the cosmetic orientation, which is not good for the true democracy. And that's why the peoples of Pakistan have been unfortunately at the receiving ends because of the denial of social system, the rampant corruption, the rigged elections, and unfortunately the rise of the clergy, the religious motive, narratives, ethnic cleansing to some extent to minority. These have been the hallmarks of our society, but the good thing is that because of the dawn of social media, the educated youth is moving towards the right direction. But unfortunately, the social media is also being used for the political division, not for the productive causes. Thank you.
Thank you. And our final opening remarks is Keo Zolin, who is the founder of Ling on Me, Myanmar. Keo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you so much, everyone, for giving their insights on the agenda as well. Just want to echo everyone here and talk more on the issues that the civil society organizations have faced in the recent years. One of them, I would have to say, is digitalization. It's a double-edged sword. It did offer new mechanisms for CSOs to integrate part of the public, but on the other hand, it also somewhat diminishes their traditional role, serving as informal representatives between the people and the government, because traditionally CSOs used to be a platform where if people wanted to influence public policies, they will either join or form CSOs. Now anyone can just go online, individualize campaigns and so on. And that's also another growing trend that has diminished the role of CSOs, individualization, where we have seen numerous activists alike across the world who had more reach, more immediate impact than CSO, which usually tends to take more time, with the gears have to turn and so on. The other is, of course, which many of the panelists here have said also, is on the loss of credibility. In the more recent times, people somewhat believe CSOs are organizational companies where they only worry about themselves and their sustainability than the actual implementation parts. So they have lost trust from the people as well. With the demanding problems growing ever bigger, the CSOs could only keep up with too much, given their limitations on different reasons that the panelists have already explained. But however, there are actually possible ways that we can navigate through it, and I could give a light on, in the case of Myanmar, where we had the youth policy. So before that, Myanmar used to be one of the 30 countries in the world without a youth policy. And then we were able to come up with this policy through the CSO's participation, where the drafting policy meeting was held 3 times, the workers' committee meetings were held 2 times, the central committee meeting was held 1 time. And this was only possible because of fellow youths who attended the ASEAN Youth Forum in 2008. Now, the policy itself is a very interesting thing to happen because they started to echo the need for this policy in 2013, which is between the government of USDP from 2010 to 2015, but the policy was never implemented until 2017, which is during the government of National League for Democracy between 2015 and 2020. It proves that with clear navigation and a clear agenda, despite very 2 different types of governments in Myanmar's context, they were able to push this, and in 2017, 8th of November, this was finally rectified with the ministry and the union ministers having their final meeting on that. So that would be a story that I could share, and I'm looking forward to more discussions that could echo on the roles that CSOs could play more in troubled crisis times. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Lynn. That was that last story was really inspiring and shows it is possible to make progress, especially the role played by civil society. So thanks for sharing that hopeful story. I want to come, we've got limited time left, and look, there's a lot of energy in the chat. There's a lot of comments being made. You know, there was one comment, which I'm not sure is true or everyone here would agree with, but, you know, someone said only some rich democracies and some of the states in some developed countries have strong civil societies. There's lots of comments, though, on funding. It seems like that really hit a chord. So I want to kick us off and come back to that issue. Gideon from Indonesia asked a question earlier. What is the best strategy to increase local funding to local NGOs, especially where there is no concern from government itself? Who would like to take that first question? Go for it, Analotti. Yeah, go for it.
Sure. I can speak just to what our research has shown here, and that is really where foreign funding is lacking to really turn to other sources of funding, especially companies. This is where corporate funding really is an opportunity, and working with companies to get not only financial support, but also in-kind support, as well as looking at more community engagements with other funders. And there is also government funding that is obviously some countries and economies more available than others. But there we are seeing government procurement stepping up in certain economies, make up for the lack of foreign funding. But I would say really there is an opportunity for engaging businesses and companies.
Yeah, may I add something? Yeah.
Please.
I may suggest that there is a concept which is getting momentum, that is the economics of charity and the channelization or operationalization of domestic saving. With the ongoing financial crunch and weak global economic conditions, these are the 2 best solutions which we have to move forward in order to educate people, in order to give basic food, shelter, clean drinking water, and the awareness to fight for their rights in developing countries. Unfortunately, the global system is dominated by the ongoing U.S. and China trade conflicts, punitive legal measures, diverging, conflicting realities towards climate change, towards chip, towards socioeconomic prosperity, towards the others things, which has to be resolved in order to give a chance to all the developing countries to move forward and to achieve the SDGs and the decarbonization, nuclear carbon neutrality, further politicalization and democratization, which is deemed fit to their traditions and the social fabric. So these are the holistic or comprehensive policy which we should promote in order to achieve the socio-economic prosperity, peace, and stability. Thank you.
Thank
Can I
you
also
for that.
add that when it comes,
Go for it. Jump in.
when it comes to funding, it's always the thorn in the sides of civil society organizations. I think it's always difficult. And there's another talking about the technology that has gone further these days and trying to leverage that. One of the ways is crowdfunding, to reach out to the other side, not towards the government, but also to the supporters, to the people around you. If you have a good campaign and if it really works for the people, then there is a possibility to go out there and get the people, the support from the people to support you. And maybe it's something that lots of CSOs have to look into, basically using the internet platform nowadays to try to crowdfund or to try to get funding for campaigns to make it work.
Thank you.
That's the go for it, Nashir. Last comment on this question, then we go to another one. But go for it, Nashir.
Actually, Nirmala took the words out of my mouth by talking. I think we cannot have dependence on corporates because corporates are fearful of funding civil society organizations which are particularly into lobbying work because they feel by funding them, government may come down upon them. Ditto for funding agencies, whether local or foreign. So I think the emphasis should be on retail fundraising. I think that's our best bet. And also some CSOs are now looking at a different model. Instead of being non-profit, they are looking at the for-profit model, that maybe we work as business enterprises and raise funding through different sources of equity, investments, etc. And there's a lot of that innovation happening, but I don't want to dwell too much on that, keeping time factor in mind. So over to the next.
All of these were great suggestions and really practical as well. And a reminder that constraints on funding affect civil society everywhere. Especially in Australia, the rules on foreign interference had huge implications there as well. So something here for everyone to grapple with. My next question, I want to pick up from someone actually also from Melbourne or in Melbourne at Monash University, who had a question on the role of misinformation. And they asked, how do we effectively prevent the spread of misinformation by major media outlets during elections, manipulating voters, especially beginner voters or first-time voters? It is a huge issue. Lots of young people have distrust towards the government, and how do we engage young generations to be better involved in a more integrated government? That's a lot there, but who would like to take a pass?
Let me start the debate. Yes, I have been frequent visitor to as election observer in different Central Asian countries and Middle East. Yes, the question is very relevant, very timely, that the youth has lost their faith in the transparency, fair, free election mechanism in different countries. And there is an urgent need to have an integrated model of transparency, participation, rather grassroots participation of civil society, the media, the educated people, the university professor, the trade unions, so that the state may consider the genuine concerns of holding fair, free, transparent elections in all these developing countries. And the free, fair inflow of informations and access to information, and right to have more and more transparent information, especially in the main stakeholders. I need to say, Chief Election Commission Office, the judicial courts, the selections, as one of our friend from Indonesia talks highly about the judicial corruption, the other things. We do have National Accountability Bureau, which mainly deals with the corrupt or corruption practices, but unfortunately, the NAB has been misused because of the political affiliation or to achieve the certain goals. So the benchmark is the access to information, the transparency level, check and balances, and all others befitting proposition, which may reduce the widening distrust between the state and the society. Thank you.
Professor Danny, maybe you want to jump in here since this is your forte. You're on mute, Professor. Still on mute. I think we might have lost the professor. There we go. Well, we'll come back to him, and maybe I can ask the good people at Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia. Oh, you're there. Thank you, Professor Denning. Go for it. And then after you, Lynn, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mike. I want to comment on the way to fight against misinformation. And I have this experience actually, especially in Indonesia now. We have what we call this buzzer RP. RP is Indonesian currency, actually, rupiah. It means that there are people who dedicate their time to produce swag, and the candidate actually use this force to create to have black campaigns against other candidates. And yes, I even had my own experience where many misinformation, false information against me produced by other candidates. The way to fight this kind of information, of course, is not easy. What I did in my own experience, I tried to of course, to create content of my own social media. Almost every day, I try to fight against this information by saying, let's fight against the hoax, let's fight against the what we call money politic, because it will jeopardize our democracy. But unfortunately, it's not enough. Of course, when we had this what we call in Indonesia pencitraan. Pencitraan means the candidate try to manipulate information in front of the voters. Yeah, it's and usually the candidate will be supported by big amount of money, and then civil society have problem to fight against this kind of resources. We have limited resources, we have limited amount of money, and therefore it's always challenging to fight against this cyber military. That's what they call cyber military. So they produce this misinformation, and they mislead the voters to vote actually somebody that is not having anti-corruption vision, but then they create the good information so that the people was manipulated. And of course, there is no other way to fight against it. And then by having another counter information, that's what I did. But it's not easy. It's very difficult to fight the misinformation.
Thanks. Lynn, over to you.
Thank you so much, Michael. I could share my experience in 2020, Myanmar's last election. I was able to be a part of a program from the International Foundation of Electoral Systems, along with the Union Election Committee. And it's very easy to give correct and important facts about the election. What's hard is to deliver those facts effectively to the audience. And what most people miss is how they have to receive it. It doesn't end when you have a good method of delivering the information about the election. You also have to consider how are these people going to receive it. It's a two-junction system. It's not just one-sided. Even if the delivery system of the information is good, if the people are not equipped with the way to receive these information, then it's a broken system. And one of the ways that I could suggest, especially for the question here on young voters, is we need to find intersecting mechanisms where young voters exist. And the easy answer is educational institutions. So high schools-wise, universities-wise, these are hotspots for dispersing correct information about elections. And this is something that most of the candidates have missed so far. Where we could have an opportunity to rally young voters, first-time voters at the ages in the university where they could easily be given up the correct information. When it comes to manipulating, that's another question, because sometimes, even if you're not necessarily meant to manipulate it, if one person, in a given scenario, if one person supports candidate A, if you're talking how good candidate B is, he or she or they will automatically think that's manipulating. So we also need to equip people with a positive civic education, that learning about these candidates is not manipulation. It's about expanding options. It's about being a healthy, civically, politically responsible first-time voters who is able to interpret the information within these elections. And I think that if we could do that, then the young voters will have no problem at all trying to filter out who represents their ideologies and what they really transpire in every election in any given governmental country.
Thanks, Lynn. And there was someone in the chat which I think really summed it up. They said very well articulated. We've got very small time left. And so the very last question, I'm going to give someone the floor to answer, and feel free to wrap in any other general points, is Devi from Hong Kong asked a question earlier, which I think many people probably asking around the world. How can we make our government to see civil society as a partner? So who would like to come in? And if people want to maybe in 30 seconds use this to make their closing remarks, that'll be great. But floor's open.
Okay, maybe I'll start. I'll make it short and sweet because it'll be the last session, the last time. Okay, so basically I think we need to rethink the image of the civil society organizations. How do we present ourselves? Who are we? We have to come as a part of the solution. And when we come as a part of solutions, we should try to have recommendations and positive thinking that we can change, make the change, not only complain and try to say what's not working. We have to focus on what's working. And I think we need to focus on educating the public and the government bodies on the real role of CSO, which is to push for reform that actually works positively for all the related stakeholders. We are not talking for one part. When the reform works, it works for everyone. But of course, it works when the governing bodies are open to this. So in Malaysia, we are at that point where we have for the first time, we have a coalition government, which means some part is working and some part is not working. We are at a seesaw balance. So the CSOs are in a position now where we are trying to get our agenda across, trying to get our information across. But at the same time, we do have a little space on the table, at the table to speak about reforms. So we have to use this opportunity and evolve with the role that we have to play in order to be taken as a serious partner. Percy was on the streets screaming loudly for change during the last elections or the elections before this, but as the change of government came in, now we had a space at the table. So now we have to sit and be able to speak. So I think it's something we have to think about, that we have to get our rules positively and evolve what is needed in order to get the reform forward. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And fire round, beginning with Lynn, because you asked first, 30 seconds each, closing remarks.
Thank you so much. And I think one of the ways that CSOs could be seen as the ally is in policy formulation between the government. There are some things that the government needs to be learned, something that they need to be taught as well, and CSOs could play a really good a part of a stakeholder in policy formulations, when they could also teach the governments on how they could be empowered in decision-making with the country's respective legislation systems and come up with policy implementation systems. And these stages are where CSOs really shine, because they are, at the end of the day, one of the most active bridges for the public community to come in and to be a part of. And then comes the gender settings that CSOs could pin them down on communities to be more than just raising their voices, but to be actively pursuing these voices as part of their interests within the society. So I think if the government could see this upside and this opportunity that could solidify their systems as well in the long run, then I think that would be a win-win situation for everyone involved, even if the crisis or troubled times come knocking again. Thank you, Michael.
Go for it quickly, Noshir.
Yes. I think if the government is confronting these CSOs with hate, I think we need to confront government with facts. That is the important point I want to make, and just leave it at that. And facts that we are nation builders and not nation destructive.
And go for it, and I love that.
Okay. I would like to tag on to what the earlier speaker said, to set a good example and to show the value of the organizations, to share the positive stories of impact, to set a good example in terms of accountability and transparency, and to make that known and to show their value to the government.
Thank you. And Mahmood, what?
Yeah, there's a need to have trust bridges of better understanding, better environment of mutual cooperation for leading towards the befitting proposition and proposals in order to achieve the socio-economic peace, prosperity, and peaceful persuasion of all the national narrative for pertaining to socio-economic prosperity in a country is the way forward. Thank you.
And Professor Denny, because I don't want to leave you out and be unequitable, so if you very 20 seconds or more would be great. And I think we can't hear you. Well, with that, there you go.
Thank you. Well, Indonesian experience is something that is very challenging, I think, in my experience within 30 years now, where we will have 2024 elections, and the presidential elections is now one of the biggest story in Indonesian political current update, and it affects our civil society. And of course, open society, one of the problems is why now we also divide because of this political competition. And I really hope into 2024 we will have a better, more democratic election, but I'm not sure about that. Thank you very much.
Well, let's all hope for a positive outcome and reminder of the role we can all play. I really want to thank our panelists, and I want to thank all of our participants. The chat has been amazing. I've been watching it. You've all said how much you've enjoyed this, how much you've learned, the practical suggestions, ultimately, how we need to change our understanding of how we view civil society around the world. This requires us all working together. Stick around at the Global Town Hall. There is far more to come, and give all of our panelists a warm round of applause. Thank you all. Thanks, everyone.